I'm Whitney.
I'm Mindy.
And I'm Deb.
We're three best friends who love nerdy things.
Well, some people think we're nerdy, but we think we're pretty awesome.
This is Our Nerdiest Thing.
This season, we are discussing Jennifer L Armentrout's From Blood and Ash, all of the books in that series, plus the Flesh and Fire series as well. We are spoiler friendly, so listen at your own risk. Hello, fellow nerds, and welcome to Our Nerdiest Thing. Today is the start of Season 2. We are talking about Jennifer L Armentrout's From Blood and Ash, Chapter 1. You may have noticed something different at the beginning of today's episode. We have a new theme song. Taylor Ash composed an original theme song for the Our Nerdiest Thing podcast, and we really like it.
Taylor Ash, we love you.
Yeah, I told Robbie, my husband, I feel like it sounds like the books that we read, you know?
It does.
Yes, definitely.
Do you want to tell them what the criteria we used was? 'Cause
Yeah.
it was very specific, but really weird.
Yeah, it was very specific and also I feel like not helpful at all. but she was
then she
she
totally
knew
turned it
exactly.
into
Yeah.
it, yeah.
We said we wanted something feminine, something fantasy, and really narrowed it in with ethereal office, like the office theme.
song.
Yeah.
Which we, since the kids are little, have watched TV with closed captioning on because we would watch it in the middle of the night for feedings. And then once you get used to closed captioning, you can never go back.
Yes.
And especially in fantasy shows, the captions are hilarious. Like on Supernatural, it always says like blood squelching and stuff like that. But on The Office, it says piano rock.
Yeah. That's what we wanted. And I think it turned out great. We love it. So thank you, Taylor Ash. And you will be hearing that theme song from here on out. Before we get into it, Deb, will you please share our nerdiest cocktail?
So tonight's cocktail is called the Red Pearl, quite fitting for our Nerdiest Cocktail in Chapter 1 of this book. We have a new cocktail sponsor called Make and Muddle, and the owner, Jennifer, calls herself a cocktail evangelist, and she says the Red Pearl seems like a gin or mead joint, and for some reason, those pubs are always drafty as fuck. So she created a good boozy hot toddy for us. So ingredients are gin, grapefruit juice, the Make and Muddle honey lavender elixir, lemon juice, and hot water. So the recipe will be on our website, and then it's in yesterday's Instagram post. So we hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Deb. Let's go into our nerdiest recap. Mindy, will you spin the wheel? Oh, names.
Yes, I have spun the wheel o' names.
Ooh.
And it's Whitney.
It's me.
Which is hard to believe because
Thank God.
Maybe it'll be me like every week for season 2, and you guys will get a break this time.
Well, I'm like, you also got like the easiest chapter. I was a little jealous. Although a lot does happen in like
There is a lot.
the 20 minutes that she is
Thinking to herself,
Right.
monologuing her life. Yes. All right, let me get the timer going. And away we go. All right. Poppy. We actually don't find out her name until like 6 pages into the chapter, but she is in the Red Pearl, which is kind of a brothel bar, like sort of casino joint. And she is lonely and bored and just wanting to live life. She's playing cards with some guards, which rhymes. And she is looking at all these scantily clad women. And then, her guard Victor comes in and some lady says, you know what? Go upstairs. And she does. And there's a man. And that's pretty much it.
a man.
And that was 30 seconds of like no information. She does think a lot of things, though.
She does. She thinks a lot of things.
I mean, a whole lot of things. But before we get into that, that was a really bad recap. But it's over. It was 30 seconds of me just rambling.
that's what
Anyway.
makes it fun, though.
Yeah.
If it was like all accurate and fully prepared, it wouldn't be as
We wouldn't do it.
It would just be a regular podcast episode.
we wouldn't do that. Before we get really deep into everything is an innuendo in my brain right now. I think it's because we're talking.
Especially because of this book.
I know we're talking.
I'm
about
gonna I'm gonna let Hawk get real deep during this podcast.
Ooh. Let's do our nerdiest vocabulary with Mindy.
I figured I'd start with the etymology of the name of our main female character. And she actually goes by several different names, but I went with the two main ones. First of all, her official, I guess, given name is Penelope. And she was named after a goddess, and you'll find out a little bit more about her in subsequent books. But what really stood out to me with this one was that Penelope, or Penelope, which is sort of a version of it, actually means weaver. And if you all remember way back when, in one of our early podcasts, when we did the bonus episode on A Light in the Flame, I talked a little bit about the Aerie and the Fates. And the Fates and the Aerie were often called weavers and depicted in white robes weaving. Do you remember this?
I do remember that.
How interesting is that?
I did not make that connection.
So I thought that was just kind of a cool little
I wonder,
tidbit.
not to like go completely forward till the end of this series, but maybe Poppy's a fate.
You know?
Well, she's named after, like you said, the goddess of wisdom, who we know has some kind of personal relationship with one of the with one of the fates. So that's that is a thought-provoking piece of information.
So that really was all I found on that I thought was a good connection. So I went into looking at the name Poppy and what it means. And not surprisingly, it means red flower, because that's what it is. But another connection it has is that poppies are closely linked to World War I. And by that, I mean, after there was a trench warfare in the poppy fields of Belgium. And so the flower came to be associated with wartime sacrifice. So in British Commonwealth countries, even today, red poppy pins are widely worn on Remembrance Day, which is November 11th, which is the day that World War I ended. And an interesting connection with me is often you see hockey teams wearing them. And I always wondered, I'm like, why are they wearing those poppies? Like, why are they wearing those red flowers? And it's for Remembrance Day. And I guess in Canada, it's a Canada thing. And they're less widely worn in the United States, but they do tend to appear around Memorial Day in May, which celebrates fallen service members. Also, poppies tend to be associated with sleep, peace, and death, which I feel like kind of all in some way connect to poppy.
Yeah.
There's nothing about them being used for medicinal
No, there was. There definitely was. But that's why they tend to be associated with sleep and peace.
Because you're high.
Because you're high.
Because it's opium, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The poppy seeds turn into... And actually, I think she mentions...
Don't do drugs, kids.
She does mention in this chapter about them chewing on poppy seeds or doing something at the Red Pearl with poppy seeds.
Well, and in one of the later books, I think it's Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, Castile takes her to a poppy field, and she's like, aren't you worried about people coming and harvesting these plants to use them for drugs? And he's like, oh, there are guards hiding in here. don't worry about it.
I'd forgotten about that.
I remember too, Penelope is the wife of Odysseus in that Greek where she's like super loyal, and he's gone for like years and years, and she waits for him and is super loyal. And I feel like Penelope in Blood and Ash is very loyal to her people, right? Like she doesn't have a wide circle at all.
No,
but the ones that she has,
that's of the other people's design, though.
Well, right. The ones that she does have that she cares about, she is like fiercely loyal to them. So.
Well, even like when she starts out, before she sort of switches camps, she's loyal to what she's been told all her life.
Soulless.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's true. Well, thank you, Mindy. So let's get into chapter 1. It is set in the Red Pearl, and it's basically an entire chapter that almost exclusively happens inside Poppy's mind, right? Like she's thinking to herself. She's looking around and observing and kind of describing what she's seeing. And I just want to shout out Jennifer Armentrout real quick and her writing, because I just thought that this was a really good example of like show, don't tell for world building. I mean, obviously she's telling us a lot of information, but just the really simple decision to have this take place in a place like the Red Pearl and playing a card game with these guards, it makes it a very like natural and organic way to find out all this information about the world and about the character and all this stuff you have to get set up.
I mean, her even playing cards with the guards, in the first 3 paragraphs that she can read emotions, that she read the room when she walked in, and that she has a mask on.
Well, and she talks too about like why she's surprised to not feel pain and anguish from the guards because, you know, and then she's able to describe like what their job kind of entails and the types of things that they're going to see. And we are able to learn so much, but it feels organic and it doesn't feel like a big exposition dump. It doesn't feel super slow or really boring. Like some books, it's hard to get through those first couple of chapters, you know?
I will say when I first read it, though, I was so lost because it was a lot of information.
I mean, it's
threading.
a ton.
It's a little different reading it now since I've read it a couple times and I'm looking for things. It came together a little bit better for me, I guess.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So
Well, even in the first 3 pages, you learn about the mist. You learn that there's huge rodents in the forest, which are barats. You learn about Duke Tierman and that he likes to punish her. You learn that there's vampires in this world.
Yep.
Like I mean, you're right. It's an insane amount of information in 3 pages.
Yeah, it really struck me how, and maybe I don't really remember being super confused or bored or whatever the first time that I read it.
Thinking, gosh, this is a lot of information, and
It's
I'm never going
so
to keep
much.
it together.
Nothing compared to Crescent City.
No.
Because
that's
I
true.
read that when it came out, and I remember going into a Sarah J. Maas group, and I'm like, can someone please tell me what all these characters are?
What the
Yeah,
fuck
And
did I
it's
just
the
it's a
read?
only
lot.
time I've ever like been online and had no one comment on something. They're like, I don't fucking know. I'm like, you in future publications of that book, it has to be like the J.R. Ward books where you have like a vocab section
Yes.
and you tell us what
Yes.
the characters are. Christ.
Yeah, it's a lot of information, but
But I agree with you. The way that she divulges all of that is unique.
Yeah, it feels natural.
Yes.
It feels like it makes sense. Sometimes you read books, you know, especially in a fantasy series, right, where you have to explain like, okay, here's the world that we're in, and it's not like the world we live in reality. It's got all these different rules, and it can very much feel like, okay, this is just a giant introduction, and it doesn't feel like I'm getting into the story, and this really did. And I don't know. I was just impressed with JLA.
I do feel like this is one of those rare books that in a series that I give 5 stars to the first book. And it's because of that, because so many fantasy series, the first book, you're like, okay, it was world building for 75%. And then I got 25% story and I can't wait to see where it goes. But
Yeah.
God, that took forever.
But it took too long to get there.
And this is not a small book,
No.
right? And I mean, she builds the world. I mean, she's still building the world in the books that she's working on right now,
That are
which
coming
is
out, yeah.
super exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited to read the cast POV that comes out toward the end probably of this season. I'm excited to do that. But yeah, I started just making a list reading this first chapter of all the things that we learn mostly about Poppy, but also the world itself. And I have like 2.5 pages of information just from one chapter.
Hit it.
Whew.
That's what she said.
Go deep and hit it. There's our quote.
I think I will go deep and hit it.
We learn very quickly that she's got this gift to feel others' pain, physical pain and emotional pain, but she's not allowed to talk about it or use it or respond to it, react to it. Like it's supposed to be a seen and not seen, not heard kind of thing. Right. So that tells you immediately the kind of world, like this is not even kind of close to our reality, right? Like this kind of supernatural power is,
And
I don't have that.
she also considers it a gift from the gods. So you already know that that's not like, you know, a typical setup. It is for fantasy, but not like
Not
it's
everyone
like
in
everybody.
contemporary.
Not
Yeah.
everyone
Yeah.
in this world has that
Not
power.
everybody has powers like that. Yeah. I loved there were several parts, even at the beginning of this chapter, but there were several tiny little words or phrases that really told you a lot about Poppy's personality. Like at the very beginning of the chapter, she says, you know, not that I do what I'm told, obviously. And it's like that one word tells you a lot about her, right? As a character. And like, she's in this very strict role as the chosen, as the maiden, but she's got all these rules that she like, yeah, I don't really follow those all of the time. And just that one word tells you a lot about who she is and the kind of personality that she has, which I thought that was really cool. That
I
happened
love how
several
she
times.
described that her being at the Red Pearl was reckless, inappropriate, and wholly forbidden.
Yeah,
And I'm
I
like,
wrote that
count
down.
me in.
I know, right? I
Did
wrote
you
that
bring
down
me
too.
along?
I wrote that down too. She calls herself the Maiden and the Chosen multiple times. She talks about how normally she is covered with a veil, and so people generally don't know her. They don't know what she looks like. They don't see her because she's talking about basically being nervous, even though she's still wearing a mask. She's still mostly covered. She doesn't want anybody to recognize her. And then is like, well, I'm usually covered with a veil, so nobody's going to recognize me anyway, right? Which again, tells you a lot. We learn a lot about how isolated she is, about how insulated she is, how lonely she is, and how strict her life is supposed to be, right? All the rules she's supposed to follow.
She also alludes later in this chapter when she's talking to the woman that recognizes, quote unquote, recognizes her as the Maiden, which we know is Miss Willa Collins, one of our favorites. And so she even talks about, she's like, well, it's not often that we see the maiden, and Poppy goes to touch her mask because she knows that the whole world knows that her face is scarred, right?
Yeah.
And so even though the reader doesn't know yet, you're like, well, why are you touching your mask?
Yeah.
Like, why would it matter? And so it is alluding to this other information we're going to find out. But then she puts herself on this pedestal to be almost like godlike herself. Like, how would anyone know I'm the maiden? No one even knows what my hair color is,
Yeah.
right? Which fucking sucks.
Well, and later the scars, we don't know about those yet, but she hints at them a lot. She talks about her body shows signs of like, I know, the horrible things about the world, and like my body shows that I know that, right? And she talks about how the Ascended really prioritize, or what's the word I'm trying to say? They revere. Thank you. They revere beauty. And then she says that she is a tragedy, and that she like subconsciously or unconsciously touches her face while she's talking about herself being a tragedy. So that there's a self-consciousness, there's something going on physically, but she doesn't ever in this chapter come right out and say it. I don't think she does explicitly, does she, in this first chapter? She talks about the terror of the cursed. She talks about a mist and a nightmare that lives within the mist. Later in the chapter, she talks about how the Atlanteans are the ones that created the mist and the nightmare within it, and that she doesn't understand why anybody would ever support Atlantia and this Prince Castile, who's supposed to be the heir,
The dark one.
The dark one, yeah. Like, she basically is like, even if nothing else, why would you support them? Because they're the ones that created this nightmare, right? Like, no matter what else they do, this one thing is the worst possible thing they could have ever done.
And again, that one sentence tells us that there is a huge divide amongst essentially like races and class, because she talks even further about having electricity in the Red Pearl and how only the richest of people can go there. And so she is setting up this kind of peasant king type of world.
Well, and that also immediately, if we're talking about places that don't have electricity, my brain automatically goes to like medieval times. And I don't know why, because
Mine does too. And because there's castles too.
Well, yeah, that's true. Maybe that's why. Because I was thinking about
like
it.
cars, right?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking like, there were a lot of times, there was a lot of years past medieval times that still didn't have electricity.
Right.
So I don't know why my brain just automatically goes there.
Also, when they get to Atlantia way further in the series, there's running water.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, and
Showers.
I always wonder, I'm like, is this the future? And the world has like crumbled? That's what I always wonder.
Another example of the little phrases or words that just tell you a lot. She talks about seeing kind of scantily clad women, and they're sitting on people's laps and sitting on tables and making kind of like lewd comments and being really suggestive. And she talks about how she looks away she looks away and her cheeks are heating, right? Like, she's embarrassed. And I'm like, gosh, that is just such a good writing tool of like this. You say so much with so little words,
In her defense, the guy had his hand in the woman's panties.
Yeah.
I know. That is so
I'm
awkward.
like, Christ, no wonder my cheeks would have heated too. And I don't get embarrassed easy.
I mean, like, I've been to bars and stuff, but I don't think
I've not been to bars like that.
right. That's why I don't think I've ever seen.
Well, also, we're not
that.
voyeurs.
Well, speak for yourself.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm not a voyeur.
Just kidding. I'm not either. I feel the need.
Me neither.
I feel the need to say that. Like, to be very clear. No. She talks about she's only allowed to wear white. She is not aloud outside of her room often. Talks about being bored, being curious, and just being super, super lonely, which is really, I don't think I remember that she talks about how lonely she is immediately from before we even know her name. We know that she is set apart, that she is isolated, and that she is lonely. She doesn't have people in her life, which I think is really sad. I also thought it was really interesting, page 5 or page 6 in the chapter is when we find out her name, but I did not remember that list of titles. Did you guys remember that? She calls herself Penelope of Castle Tierman, kin of the Balfours, the Queen's favorite, chosen. And I was like, I do not remember any of that.
I do remember the Queen's favorite. I mean, they call her that a lot.
I didn't remember that
was like a title, like an official title.
It was capitalized as if it were her actual name. And I did not remember that kin to the Balfours at all.
You know what's interesting, though? In A Light in the Flame, was it in A Light in the Flame when they get married? And she has to...
Well, who gets married?
Sarah and Nyktos get married, or they have their big thing... I may be thinking of the completely
She's
wrong
had her
book.
coronation, her consort coronation.
And then she has to pick a title. So that is a thing, apparently, in this world.
I didn't think about that.
So maybe that's something that they had to,
What would your title be, Mindy?
What would my title be? Oh, Lord. Mindy Jett, watcher of hockey and reader of hockey porn.
Today,
that's pretty good.
I think my title just for today would be Whitney, giver of suppositories.
For the record, not to me or Mindy. Whitney has a toddler that has been sick. I just want to reiterate, you may not be a voyeur, but I also don't let you put things in my butt.
We're not that close.
I mean, in the nursing home, I'm still not going to do that for you, but I'll be like, nurse.
We'll press the button for you.
Right, yeah, exactly.
What's your title, Deb?
Yeah, what was yours be?
My title would be Deb Eichenberger, badass of the household and always tired.
You got the badass part right, for sure.
It's okay to be tired. I work hard.
Yeah.
Well, it's tiring being a badass, too. I mean,
Well, that's true. It's hard to be that awesome all the time.
I mean, it really is. It wears you the fuck out.
It takes a lot of energy. I wrote down, we find out that she's 18 years old. I wrote in all caps, of course. like that is such a thing in these books that the heroines are
because it's still
young,
but old enough to not be too creepy.
To be gross.
Well, she's technically legal, which
Right.
is still 18 is so young. But like we even talked about in last week's bonus episode for King of Battle and Blood that we're so happy Isolde is 26.
Yes.
Right, which is still
She's 26.
young.
Why couldn't Poppy have been destined to ascend at 25? Like why did she have to be 19 at her ascension?
I give this
I know why. That actually is relevant. It's
Yeah.
because of the culling.
Right. I was going to say,
sorry, there
I
is a
give
reason
this
for that.
one a little bit more of a pass just because of that. Like it's worked into the book. And, you could argue that, the author could have made the culling happen at 25 and, could have made Ascension be something that happens at 25 or 22 or whatever. And like, that's true. But part of the deal is that the ascension and giving your kids over is giving children over and not like fully formed adults who can fight back. And so I give that for this particular book a little bit more of a pass because I understand the function of it within the plot. But just in general, like all these fantasy books that we really like and that are very well written, we just read ACOTAR, right? She's 19 years old. Like they're all so young every single freaking time. And I just don't understand why they all have to be so young always.
Well, I want to reiterate, I know at the very beginning of this episode, Whitney warns us every week that we are spoiler heavy, right? We'll be talking about all of the books in this series. But if you've not read them and you're still listening to this, even though we've given you the spoiler, what's the word I'm looking for? Warning.
Yeah.
The Ascended are vampires that have tricked an entire country into thinking they're giving their children to the gods, but actually they're feeding on them. And so they have to give their second children to this kingdom at the age of 13 to be blessed by the gods. And of course, the parents never see them again because they're dead.
Right.
But you don't even find that out until the fourth book?
Yeah. Sometimes it's like babies.
Right.
So it's all kinds of different ages.
When Poppy is supposed to ascend at 19, it is because her blood will have turned Atlantean and they're going to turn a bunch of people into vampires.
Yeah, she will have developed like power basically for them to exploit.
But little do they know is that she would have kicked their ass. Like I don't think there's any way, like the more we learn about this person that, I mean, she doesn't come off as meek here at all. She comes off as innocent, right? But she's not meek. But I can't imagine in any world where if she hadn't gotten out of this situation that she wouldn't have exploded when these things started to happen. She would have killed everybody, I bet. Like everybody. Yeah.
I think it would have been like an explosion of power, like we see Feyre do in some of the scenes in ACOTAR, right? When she becomes Fae. No, I totally agree with you. But yeah, it's just that I know we're going to talk about tropes later on, but that I guess that's a trope.
The virgin trope does nothing for me. And it really doesn't do anything for me whenever, and I mean, this series does do this a little bit. She takes a little bit longer to get there, but I read a book a few weeks ago that had zero reason for the girl to be a virgin, and she, with her lifestyle, she was a socialite. She wouldn't have been. I mean, no offense to socialites, but like, you know what I mean? She wasn't sheltered, right? She was like 20. She wouldn't have been a virgin. And like all of a sudden she has like porn star moves. And I'm like, no virgin is going to be like, you know what? I think I'm going to ride on top of you the very first time we have sex. Like that doesn't happen.
Right.
Jamie Fraser did.
Sorry, hold on. I have to go to the bathroom for a minute.
Oh man, well Jamie Fraser is just a different breed.
Yeah. He has his own supernatural powers.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast episode, right? Oh man, that's really funny. Kind of going in that same vein of her being young and sheltered and the virginal character, she starts to talk. You mentioned this already. I think it was you, Deb, the Duke. She talks about his roaming hands, overly familiar hands, an unnatural thirst for punishment. Immediately, you get not really details, not real information, but just this gross feeling, right? Like this girl experiences
about how Lord
Mazine,
how he watches.
Yes, like his right hand man.
So like you get a really, like in my mind, I'm thinking this is much more, and we find out later it really isn't sexual.
Yes, it is. They make her pull her top down, and she tries to cover her breast, and he pulls her hand away.
I'm thinking orgy in my head. It's much more. It's much more disgusting, actually. Than what I imagined it would be.
It's not sexual in that they are doing sexual things to her,
but it's domineering in a. Yeah,
it's sexual
and making her expose herself in a way that she's not allowed to
do for anybody else.
It's sexual in that they are getting off on hurting her because they're like sociopaths.
And I mean, we've talked about this several times on the podcast, so I just want to point it out. Consenting adults is fine. You do you know, you're not actually hurting people and everyone's consensual, but this is not consensual, which makes it so icky. And again, he's like 500 years old, Tierman, and she's
18, right?
Gross. And he's raised her.
Yeah, it's really
I mean,
nasty.
like she considers them like her surrogate parents.
Right.
Yeah, which is a really big bummer in general.
Yes,
it's a really big bummer. But then when you add that on top of it, it is really gross. That just made me think of, when you're talking about consenting adults, that just made me think of that New Girl episode where Jess is dating Justin Long's character, Genslinger, and they're talking about like light choking or whatever. Do you know what I'm talking about?
And she wears that bondage thing.
Yeah,
she doesn't know how to put it on.
Yeah, and she like chokes him and then later goes to hug him and he's like, whoa! Oh man, I love that episode. Sorry, I'm over here like giggling while you're talking about Duke Tierman being such a creep. Well, also, so I would needed to explain myself.
Also, because Whitney's also the one always in book club where she's like, did they have to choke her?
It's okay on New Girl though.
Right, because they're nerdy and they don't like it.
Yeah, because it's all good. I really like this. Kind of broke my heart a little bit when she's talking about she's kind of just looking around. I can't remember if she's actually gotten up from the card table at this point, but she's looking and observing the other people at the Red Pearl. And she's looking at these women that don't have masks on, and says they weren't ashamed or afraid to be seen. Whoever they were, they had freedom that I deeply coveted. And it was just like, all these little clues of, like how ridiculous her life is, right? And she's just missing out on so much life, and she knows it too.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're sheltered from things and you don't know what you're missing out on, right? But to know I am being sheltered, I am being kept apart, I am missing out on stuff. That's why she sneaks out at night. That's why she does stuff like go to the Red Pearl. It just hurt my feelings a little bit on Poppy's behalf. She talks about the gods not paying attention to her, or how she assumes they must not be.
That was a really cool.
I did too. I wrote down like cool foreshadowing in my book, because later in the series we find out the gods are very interested in Poppy, and they are all paying attention to what she's doing.
They don't care if she has sex or not.
Exactly, right. Yeah. She talks about, like, I've been doing all kinds of forbidden things and they haven't intervened yet, so I guess they're just not paying attention to me. And it's like, no, they are. They just don't care about that.
They just don't care what you're doing right
yeah,
now.
right. They're like biding their time.
They're like, you go ahead and live it up, girl. You do you.
They're all for it. I can totally picture Seraphina like, yeah, girl, go to the Red Pearl. Yeah, go every night. And okay, so she's talking about her family. We finally learn her name. We finally learn her nickname. She talks about, my mom called me Poppy. She didn't mention her dad, which I thought was interesting. That he wouldn't be somebody that she names as calling her Poppy. But she talks about her brother calls her Poppy, and very few others too. And then she starts talking about my brother Ian. He ascended. He lives in the capital now. And she talks about how he's gotten married. And I continue, we've read all the books in this series. There have been two new book releases since I started reading the series, and I still am like, who is this lady Claudea that married Poppy's brother? Because they mention her like twice in this book, and then when she sees her brother in person again.
And I'm with you. I don't know why it's relevant.
Exactly. Like, we have not met this lady Claudea. She's been mentioned twice by name though, and I'm like, I feel like that would be weird to me to give her a name, to mention her more than once, to have it be
come of it.
Yeah, to just have it be a throwaway thing, and not just be like, he married some lady. I don't even know her name, because he didn't know her before they got married. Like,
right. And she's not there later on when she finally sees them again.
Right. And she asks about, that's one of the times that she's mentioned, one of the few times that she's mentioned. She's like, where's your wife? And he's like, Lady Claudea is in the capital. And it's like, who is that? And I know some people theorize that maybe it's Jadis.
Ooh, that'd be cool.
I've seen that on, like, in the Facebook groups that we're in. Yeah, that maybe he had been paired up with Jadis, who is a Draken or Draken. How do you guys say?
I say Draken. What do you say, word nerd?
I originally said Draken, but then when we all got together at our first nerdy book retreat, I changed it to Draken because it makes
peer
sense.
Pressure.
Well, but it makes sense. When I said Draken because it sounded like dragon in my head, and I thought that was what the author was going for, was that she wanted it to sound like dragon, but they're not dragons. But then when I actually looked at the sort of how the word is set up, it's like Drake with an N on it, and it makes more sense. If it was Draken, it would be Drakken, I would think. That's how nerdy I am. I've thought about this quite a bit.
I was going to say, I love how you have justification of like, I've decided it's this because blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, no, I just said it like that at first. So that's what I went. Yeah. So that's what I went with. That's really funny. I would actually really like that if that was Jadis, like posing as Lady Claudea or whatever.
Yeah, I don't hate that idea.
Because we know
like that
something's going to happen with Jadis.
We know that Jadis is still alive. For a while in the books, they thought that she was probably dead. But then we find out at the very end of War of Two Queens, when Nectis shows up, he's like, I'm her dad. I can feel that she's still alive. That would be cool to me if they kind of shacked her up with Ian and gave him that responsibility of like guarding her or something. Or if maybe she's imprisoned somewhere and they just said, you're married to this lady, to kind of like cover what they were really doing with her. I would like that. that would make sense to me to have her be a part of the story without actually being a part of the story.
Yeah.
Because as of right now, it's just like, I don't know, Jadis is around here somewhere.
That's a cool theory.
Yeah, it wasn't mine. I wish I could take credit for it. It's somebody, shout out to the JLA, the Jlanders Facebook group. somebody in there posted
Or it
about
could just
it.
be that Ian knows how impressionable Poppy is, and he's like, if I don't tell her some name, she's
That's
gonna
true,
wonder.
too.
And she does. She gloms onto that. She connects to that.
That's a good point.
But that's the boring version. I like the Jadis version better.
Well, she talks about Ian is a good storyteller.
Yeah, true.
And that he writes letters. He used to tell her stories when they were together, and now he tells her stories through his letters. And we find out later in the series that the Balfour family, they have a lot of importance, the family line, not just in the time frame that Poppy is living in, but in years, like,
Right.
I guess centuries prior.
I guess so,
with
yeah.
Niktos and
Yeah.
Serafina. That would be centuries, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that the family has seers in them, right? Did I make that up?
I don't remember that, but that doesn't mean you're not right.
I know that they think that Leopold was a victor for Poppy, I guess, or maybe for Coralina, but he was a victor. So maybe that's why I think that maybe seers are part of the
She
Balfours.
mentions in these chapters that there aren't any seers around anymore.
Yeah.
But then
There's one standing right next to her in a
Right.
minute.
Right.
or that when she's talking about that, I can't remember the exact wording, but she's like, they're not really around anymore.
Well,
or whatever.
that is a really cool way, though, to use almost this unreliable narrator in Poppy, in that she does not know these things,
Right.
And so it does set the reader into thinking, like, okay, so in this world there aren't any prophets or
Right.
seers, and then we know they are everywhere in Atlantia.
Yeah.
I really like that, using Poppy as our unreliable narrator, because I really enjoy the experience of reading something where I'm surprised and shocked by stuff along with
the
my main
that's fun.
character.
Yeah.
I really like that a lot. And there are some books I just read, the Bend Her, which
It's so good.
listen, I feel really dirty every single time I say that title. Bend Her.
Well, I think it's more about bending her powers,
I
but
know,
it's a euphemism for sure.
Well,
I mean, yeah.
I started reading that. This is a tangent. I started reading that, and I'm like, this is definitely going to be like bend her over. the bed. And then it was like, kind of.
I mean,
that's kind of what it was.
So we reviewed this on our Instagram page. Cassie Alexander is the author. She's really, really great. But I was like, no, there is spanking in the book, but it's literally a part of the plot.
It is a part
and
of the
I can't
plot.
say why.
I know, right?
But it is.
Don't tell me because it's on my list,
Right.
but I haven't read it.
So I put it in her, because I got the ARC first. And
Yeah.
so I put it review in the ARC group for her. And she's like, she was making fun of me. She's like, no, seriously, the spanking's a part of the plot.
It is.
like, it
though.
is.
It is.
I promise.
The articles are really good. I promise. No, but what I was going to say about that book is that that's a dual point of view book where you are seeing things from two different characters' perspectives. So you know a lot more information than the characters do.
Right.
Because you're
getting the whole story
Yeah,
instead of
you're
just
getting
half
the
of
full
it.
story, which sometimes I like. And in that book, I really liked having all that. But I like in Blood and Ash, I like being surprised by stuff the same way that Poppy is. Like, it just has
You
more
kind
of
of
an,
grow with her.
yeah, it has more of an emotional impact, I feel like, when she is struggling with the truth of something and I'm also struggling right alongside her. So I just really enjoy that. And then that's when this part of the chapter is when she starts talking about herself being a tragedy as opposed to a great beauty. And she starts making comments about being a virgin and her purity, which I actually wanted to talk about that a little bit. If you guys don't mind going ahead and doing that.
Let's talk about that.
She says, purity, I hated that word, the meaning behind it, as if my virginity determined my goodness, my innocence, and its presence or lack thereof was somehow more important than the 100 choices I made every day. And I really liked that she is kind of giving this anti-purity culture stance. That's what I wrote down. Love this anti-purity culture stance, even while she is a virgin and is expected to stay that way.
Well, isn't it funny, though, how we don't know what time frame this is, right? But it is this anti-purity thing that you see that is really indoctrinated into all of us via religion.
Right.
I mean, that's really what it boils down
Well, I mean,
to.
that's where the whole purity culture comes from.
Right.
It's from white American evangelical Christianity.
And I will say for this book, just like the age gap thing, I give this book more of a pass because it's a trope to make in fantasy romance books. You have a really young heroine main character who usually is a virgin too, and part of the reason that she's a virgin is because she's really young. However, this book I give more of a pass to because the fact that Poppy is a virgin is very much part of the plot. It's part of the world. It's part of how she is being manipulated and how she's being controlled. She is expected to stay a virgin before she's, quote, given to the gods, right?
And to me too, it hits a little different than the virgin who's by choice, I'm just not going to do this and I don't like men or whatever. And I mean, this is forced on her. This is forced.
But also, like, I think poor Poppy, like, if she had stayed in this role, she would have never gotten laid. That sounds horrible.
That sounds terrible.
And for her, it's not even just sex. It's
Connection.
Yes, like any kind of relationship at all, even friendship with her, maidservant or what, I can't remember what Tawny's actual,
she's
her role title is.
She's her maidservant, isn't she?
Is a maidservant.
Her handmaiden, maybe?
Something like that.
She gets, fussed at basically for being too familiar with Tawny and getting too familiar with her guards. Like, she's not supposed to have friendships. She's not supposed to talk to people.
Well, because if she talks to anyone, they're going to make the world crumble down around her.
Exactly,
because
right?
She is hidden from so much truth that they know if she talks to anyone, they're fucked.
Yeah. Well, and,
What's funny is she knows a lot more than most people give her credit for, though.
Right.
Well, and that's because she breaks the rules.
Yeah.
Right? Like, she willingly is like, yeah, I'm just going to not do all of that. Like, I'll do the big stuff, right? I'll stay a virgin and I won't have a boyfriend.
Any typical 18-year-old, though. You
Right.
know what I mean? And also, you have secluded her from every life experience. So just part of her brain at that age is going to seek adventure.
Yeah. Because, we find out in later books, like, she wasn't allowed to go play in the snow because she wouldn't have been able to avoid other people. And,
And it was, like, uncomely for the maiden to be out there getting
unbecoming.
dirty.
It's basically like she lives in... I think of like Puritan era or like even Prohibition era America,
but like worse.
Yes, but it's like I'm trying to think of the American Girl doll that lives with her grandma.
We don't fucking know.
That was before my time.
It was the one my sister really. I had the World War II one, and this was like
you guys had a Purity
Depression
American
era.
Girl doll.
No, not Purity. It was like Depression era or maybe World War I era. But
was
she
her
lived with
mascara
her
all like smeared under her eyes. She was
Samantha.
in a Rosie the Riveter.
That's
outfit.
who it is. It's Samantha. She lived with her grandmother, and her grandmother has all these rules and like expectations of like you're a wealthy young lady.
I didn't know so much story went into the American Girl doll.
Oh, dude, that's a whole other episode. That could be a bonus episode is the American Girl dolls.
I'm going to be busy that night.
That'll be a Whitney exclusive.
As I'm listening to you talk about this, it reminds me a lot about the way that Catholics revere Mary.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I see a lot of parallels with how...
The Virgin Mary.
Damn, that could have been a good deep dive. Why did none of us think of that?
Yeah.
You're so smart.
Not smart enough to think about it before I prepared for this podcast.
Well, I did, growing up in kind of the Bible Belt and growing up, my dad used to be a pastor. I grew up in the church. This purity thing, this idea that Poppy lives with of you're going to be given over to the gods. And the most important thing is that you are a virgin when you are given over, right? And there's a lot of parallel there, and I'm assuming maybe this is where JLA is coming from when writing this, right? There's a lot of parallel there as a young girl growing up in the Bible Belt, growing up in church and youth group, being told that when you get married, not even if you get married, right? When you get married, the most important thing is that you are a virgin. And if you're
not for God, for your
husband. Also for God, but really for your husband.
Really for your husband,
right?
Which is why it is a patriarchal stance on purity, because I will tell you, not being pure for my husband did not change a fucking thing.
Well, no, you're supposed to turn a light switch on.
Right.
Like,
can we talk about, just for a second, because I don't think I've ever gotten fully clear on this, in the world of Blood and Ash, for knowing everything that we know, reading all of the books that are out, I don't really understand why Poppy was given that expectation to remain a virgin. I get why they isolated her from people, because like what you said earlier, Deb, about if the wrong person came into her sphere, then she would find out the truth about what was going on in the world around her, which is exactly what happens, right? But I don't really understand specifically why they needed to make sure that she was virginal and pure.
I think it has to do with the entire evolution of the story of the maiden. They're born in a shroud. They're sequestered their entire life. They're pure for the gods. She's an example to other women, right? Like that are going to be going through their ascension. And I think it is this like pedestal type of idea.
Like
and and if you think about the people that are influencing things, I mean, the Blood Queen is influencing almost everything, but the little minor influences around are all men.
Yeah, that's true.
And you've got to remember too, this whole purity culture in our time is really just the foundation for gender roles and, basically a patriarchal society where men are the providers and the basically overlords, and women are supposed to submit and be. And what I found in my research, I did a little research on purity culture, and what I found in that is that men are taught that their minds are evil, while women are taught that their bodies are evil. And so that perpetuates this whole thing of, men's thoughts and actions can be pure or impure, but women are impure.
But women
pure.
also aren't allowed to have those thoughts.
Exactly.
Right?
But see, that's what I'm saying. Like this whole purity culture and this whole virginal aspect, it really just perpetuates this man-dominated society, which you're talking about is most of the people around her are
because
men.
it is okay in any purity culture if the man has sex before marriage.
Yes, it is.
Because he's a man and he has a dick and he can't help himself.
And it's the woman's fault because she clearly dressed wrong or,
she had
perpetuated
boobs.
it. Yeah.
Like, how dare she have boobs? Yeah. It's crazy though, because in this culture you talk about like cleaving to your spouse and doing all of these things, which I do agree with. I do think you should, if you're going to be married, you need to be all in. But cleaving doesn't mean that you have to be a virgin. It doesn't mean that you've never dated anyone else. It doesn't mean that you didn't go to clubs, and I mean, shit, my husband and I probably go out more now than we have in years now that our kids have gotten older.
Yeah.
But like, you don't have to do that to be a good person. And we were even talking last week on the bonus episode that what we love about King of Battle and Blood is how healthy Isolde's relationship with sex is as a woman, right?
Yeah.
Because you never, ever, ever see that in books.
The unusual thing about the Blood and Ash world is that Poppy is expected to be virginal and pure, but like really nobody else is. And she talks about that, right? The ladies in waiting, the people who are going to be ascending and the ascended themselves, they go to the Red Pearl and they're allowed to cavort with the opposite sex and they're allowed to have relationships. And she talks about how she hears the ladies in waiting talking about, well, there's all kinds of things that we can do that isn't,
Well, she goes
sex.
to the Red Pearl because we find out, I think in the next chapter, she's wearing the cloak of one of the servants, Britta, and she goes because she heard them talking
about it.
about
Fun.
the sexual adventures. They
Yeah,
can have
she
at this
talks
place.
about that in this. That's in this first chapter.
Oh, is it?
So that expectation of being pure or whatever is really just for her as the maiden. It's not a cultural thing. And then later in the series, when we go to Atlantia and we meet the Atlanteans, that culture especially is
They're very open about sex.
Yeah, they're very sexually free. And would fluid be the right word to describe that?
I would say they're uninhibited.
Yeah.
Uninhibited. Yeah, that's a good. They will, she goes to it's a wedding celebration, I think, and they're basically having like threesomes and orgies like at the reception.
And then she goes and gives a blowjob to Castile next to a
right.
cave.
And everybody's cool with it, and it's not a big deal, and it's not weird, and it's not like, well, this was a special orgy wedding. Like, it's just
How many of those have you been to with?
0. This is the Bible Belt. But I mean, like that Atlantean, especially that culture is very sexually free. And I feel like the Soulless culture kind of is too. It's literally just her, right? That has that expectation. Nobody else really does.
But I think it is part of that secluded part of her, right? Like no one can touch her because she belongs to the gods, right?
Yeah.
The only people that are going to be allowed to see her face first are the gods. Only like 3 people know what she looks like. She is pure. No one's touched her. She's for the gods only.
You know, we find out later that she's not for the gods at all.
It's a bunch of bullshit.
Right?
Yeah, like it's
Poor
she's
Poppy. She goes through it.
right. She really does. It's quite a journey.
Can we take a quick break?
Yes.
Okay.
We need a refill for these drinks.
Let's take a quick break.
Craft cocktails don't have to be fussy or ingredient heavy. Make and Muddle is here so that you can have a delicious 3-ingredient cocktail every time. Spend more time reading and less time mixing. Make and Muddle. Cocktail evangelists here to spread the good news about booze.
Can we talk about the other tropes in this book?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
in this
Chapter.
book, right?
Yeah.
Or even in this chapter, right?
This
Because-
book, as in book 1.
yeah, because so much happens in this book. I mean, it's not a small book, but I remember thinking like at a certain point, and of course we'll get there, but I was like, what else are they going to do? And then it like blew up and got even better. So just some general observations. Slow burn, romance,
Oh, yes.
vampires and werewolves, secret identity, kidnapping, one horse, one bed, the virginal maiden, which we've already talked about, unknown magical powers, and then the guard and the princess.
The guard and the princess.
So, another really good guard and the princess book that I have recommended to both of you several times, but I want to send it to the podcast listeners because they might read it before you guys do, is What Lies Beyond the Veil. No, I'm sorry, not What Lies Beyond the Veil. There is another one, and I will put it in the show notes. It's very similar to that, and I'm so sorry I can't remember what it's called. I'll look it up while we talk. Keep going.
I would love to read it, but
But I've also got,
Fuck you.
but I've also got What Lies Beyond the Veil and Savage Lands and all kinds of other things
I
on
was
my
gonna say-
TBR that you keep telling me to read.
yeah, What Lies Beyond the Veil is definitely on my TBR.
It's in my Kindle
am-
Read
Unlimited.
faster.
I am reading the Play to Prisoner series right now, though.
That hurts because I have to go to a stupid job every day. I do.
But I
my-
listen.
You can listen while you're doing
Yeah, I
it.
can.
It's my
listen.
escape from getting yelled at by a 3-year-old every day.
Okay, so I did find the book, and it is I actually knocked it down a star because it's so much like what Lies Beyond the Veil that it bothered me a little bit. But there's enough different now that I've had like some distance from it. I might go back and raise the star up to 4 stars. So it's called A Kingdom of Stars and Shadows. And it is this woman that is meant for the king, and his brother is the captain of the guard, and he's her mate.
Oh.
And I'm just, spoiler alert, he gets her off with a book.
Oh, my.
It is not bad.
With a book.
Yes.
He needs to teach
You
my
like-
husband. Like he reads to her? Or
I
he
was going to
actually
say,
uses it
like, he's
physically?
reading to her, or he, like,
No.
It's physical.
he like, rubs it on her.
I wish this was on video right now so you guys could have seen that.
So, like, he's reading to her?
He is not reading to her. I'll leave it at that. And it's got a good little twist at the end. So much so that I think, so the 3rd book is going to be coming out really soon. I think I'm going to reread this and then read that again. But so 2 books that are kind of like this. So What Lies Beyond the Veil, and then Kingdom of Stars and Shadows is the one that's the Garden Princess.
That might be on my TBR, too, honestly.
It should be. I brought it up enough.
I was going to say, I don't think this is the first time I've heard that title. She talks about having insomnia and nightmares. She talks about people being kidnapped for ransom, and then says there have been other attempts that stemmed from far different, more violent reasons. And then later on, that is when she talks about Atlantia and Prince Castile, the Dark One, the dissenters, and that's really what she's talking about with the different, more violent reasons, is the dissent against the leadership of Solus.
Well, and this all comes about because she thinks that the lady who's talking to her could possibly be a dissenter.
Right. Which, I mean, essentially she is.
I mean,
right?
she is, yeah.
She is an Atlantean.
But
She's
like
a
her
seer.
first thought about her is, oh, she's a dissenter and she doesn't like it. But she still follows her advice and she still like chills out with her. So it's
Right.
that was sort of eye opening.
And if you've read all these books, which hopefully you have, if not, keep going because they're awesome. That is Miss Willa Collins' Poppy finds her book in a library, and it's
The
actually
Miss Willa.
the Miss Willa. It's essentially a diary of part of this woman's sex life that Poppy learns all kinds of great things
All
from.
kinds of things.
And it turns out that Miss Willa Collins sits on the King's Council of Castile's land. So his father's council has Miss Willa Collins on it, and they kind of fangirl over her when they figure out
100%.
that she's there. So I think it's
love
funny that in this chapter, Miss Willa's there. Poppy doesn't know who she is. Castile doesn't know she's there, but she is like literally pulling all the strings to get them where they need
She's
to
like
go.
the puppet master.
Because,
I love it.
she has seen what will happen. And she even says later, what does she say in this chapter? Like, I think you'll find solace in
You'll
that
find
room.
sanctuary.
Yeah, you'll find sanctuary. And she tells Poppy later, she's like, well, I think he found sanctuary too. And that's what I could see whenever I sent you up there.
I wonder if Miss Willa is also a victor. So in this world, we know that victors are people who have basically like one unique purpose to help somebody of importance, somebody that's going to do something for good or for bad.
And they don't even have to be a virgin.
Right. Yeah, I know, right? To change the world. And the victor has some kind of important role to kind of like push them toward their ultimate purpose. And we know that Victor, the person, is a victor for Poppy. And I wonder if Miss Willa is a victor as well. Because, you know, she orchestrates this whole thing. And you were talking, she still listens to Miss Willa's advice. The only reason she does is because Victor comes in and she's like, oh man, if anybody's going to recognize me in this mask, it's going to be him because he's basically like my dad and he's, you know, her personal guard and spends every single day with her. And I wondered too, you know, Miss Willa tells her he's here a lot. You know, that girl that's all up in his lap is in love with him, I think. And, you know, he's here enough.
And
for
Poppy's
her.
like, ew.
Yes. She's like, yeah, he comes here often enough so that this girl's like in love with him. Like, oh,
It's
that's
like
so
finding out
gross.
your parents have sex.
Yeah. And I'm like, I wonder if he actually had ever been there before. Or if he literally only like if he really
she
did
was trying to get her to be embarrassed and leave.
Yes, well, because Victor is Poppy's Victor, right? So he was there that night, whether he realized it or not. He was there that night to push her to listen to Miss Willa and go up and meet Hawk, right? Like, and I'm like, I wonder if he actually ever did that before. Like if he really did go to the Red Pearl often and that was part of it, or if it was just that one night he went for that one reason and Miss Willa told a couple of white lies to get her to go upstairs.
Yeah.
You know?
That's a fascinating
But she didn't
theory.
need those white lies, though, to be
No,
honest.
she didn't.
Poppy was like, oh, fuck, he's sitting at the entrance.
I gotta go.
There's
Yeah.
someone in his lap. Like, and I mean, he even knows how she moves.
Right.
Because he's with her when she's veiled
time.
all the time.
Yeah.
Right? He's her main guard.
Yeah,
We haven't even talked about the fact that he's taught her how to fight. He arms her.
Well, she does say that in this
I know, but I'm
chapter.
saying we haven't talked about it. I just that's another
Again,
thing.
such a tidbit of information that doesn't seem super
It doesn't-
important at the time.
But at the same time, it also gives that whole juxtaposition of how she's supposed to be this maiden, the chosen, or whatever, but she's really kind of a rebel. It sort of fits
Yeah.
in with that.
Yeah, early in the chapter, she talks about how she has while she's sitting with the guards, she's saying they're off duty, but I'm sure that they're like armed and have weapons because they're guards, right? And I'm armed too. And she talks about her bloodstone dagger with the woven bone handle.
Which comes into play later.
Right. That's what I was just about to say. Like that, we find out in War of Two Queens, which is the most recent book at this point. That is the woven bones from Prela, who is the sister to Delano, who is, and my theory is that Delano is Poppy's bonded woven. Like he is always like right there to protect her more than really just Kieran. He and Kieran are the ones that are there to protect her more than anybody else. And that's his sister, who was the bonded woven to Castile's brother. I'm like, hold on, let me make sure I'm saying this correctly.
We need to do the genealogy of
Oh
these
my
books.
gosh. Which his brother is Malik, depends on how you want to pronounce it.
I say
So-
Malik.
Malik is how they say it in the
don't care.
audiobooks, but they also say Niktos in the audiobooks, and Jennifer Armentrout says Niktos. So I don't fucking know.
It's, you know,
It's
his-
Niktos.
Castile's brother, MLA.
Malik.
MLA.
It just doesn't make sense because just phonetically. I'm sorry.
But they do talk later about how his name is so close to Malek's.
Yeah.
See, and
But see that Malik though, with the E, Malik. That makes sense.
that's how I say his. That's what I was
Malik
going to say.
doesn't sound right with the, and then it would be E.
I said Malik, didn't I?
No, I'm not.
Oh, no.
I'm talking about
I've had a couple cocktails of this one. I'm like, is that what I said?
the whole thing is that I thought Castiel's brother is Malik, and then the other dude is Malik, right?
Right.
That's how I've been saying it. Apparently, it's switched. Apparently, it's supposed to be the one I thought was Malik is Malec is supposed to be pronounced Malik. No, I'm sorry. Phonetically, that does not work for me. I'm gonna say no.
Right. I pronounce it Malek and Malik.
See.
Oh, really?
Okay, so for the
Is that how it is in the books?
In the audiobooks, it is.
the former king, Elawana's ex, I say Malik. And
Yeah.
for Castiel's brother, I say Malik.
That's me too.
Yeah.
Y'all
And
are
I know that's not right. But
Well, apparently, so is the lady that reads these books. 'Cause
I
she's not
know,
pronouncing Nyctos' name right.
I think
either.
everybody's
It's
wrong.
Niktos.
Yeah.
God, it's Niktos.
Everybody's wrong. There's got to be some like third option somewhere. And that's the right way to pronounce it. We just don't know what it is yet.
Primal of life.
yeah, the primal of life, exactly. I did not remember. I remembered that Poppy talks about Victor's wife and how she's died, and he like
I
always.
forgot he had a son that died.
I did not remember
forgot
the
about the
kid.
son, too,
I
I
did
know.
not remember the baby, that she died in childbirth, and she and the baby both died. I didn't remember that she ever had a name, Camellia, or Camellia, however you want to pronounce it. Word nerd. I don't know.
Skipped over that. I totally didn't realize that she
I
had a
didn't
name.
remember that she was given a name, which much like Lady Claudea, I'm like, okay, so is she given a name because that's going to come back later? Because so many things come back later in other books, right? So I don't know. I feel like I assign importance to stuff that's going to be like, I mean, I just felt like she should have a name.
Well, because sometimes there's importance assigned to things that were like, that should, like it comes out of nowhere. So, I mean, I think at this point, especially with the way that we're kind of picking apart these books at this point,
Yeah.
it's natural to do that.
It's like I'm really reaching. Like, well, Camellia.
But you might not be.
Yeah, she's given a name, which means maybe we're going to meet her later because we do see Victor in the prequels,
And we
right?
talked about this with Claire Better. She's only mentioned a couple times, but she's a major part that permeates through the entire story.
Yeah, that is true. So Poppy goes upstairs where this mysterious lady tells her to go, and she goes into a room where the door is unlocked and says that she smells dark spices and pine. And then suddenly there is a very hard, very male body with a deep voice, which we know is Huck, but she doesn't realize that until the next chapter.
He says, "This is unexpected." And I wrote in my book, "Yum."
You know what's funny is while I was reading this, I realized, so many authors describe their male love interests as like having really hard bodies, which they, I think, mean like super muscular.
Yeah.
Yes, like very like jacked, strong build. But every time it's like this very hard body, I'm like, oh my gosh, how awkward would that be to go in?
Walk around with an erection.
Yes, all the time. And then I feel like,
Well, we do know that Hawk does usually have an erection.
I know, right? Yeah. 90% of the time.
I'm reading a new series by Helena Hunting, and it's hockey porn.
Tell him what she writes, what the series is called.
Well, the first series I read was Pucked, and this one is starts with a lie for a lie, and then the next one's like a favor for a favor. So it's that kind of like alliteration or whatever.
Ooh, I'll take a favor for a favor.
Well, and I'm reading a favor for a favor right now, and the dude has a groin injury, but he keeps getting a Woody, and it hurts him when he gets a Woody. It's hilarious.
It's like New Girl.
Yes,
that happens with Schmidt.
yes.
Oh, I need the next book to be a butt ending for a butt ending.
Ooh,
what?
a butt ending for a butt ending.
That's a hockey, like,
It's a hockey thing.
I'm doing a hand motion.
You're also doing a jerk off
That's
motion.
what I'm saying. Like, it's a hockey, what is it?
The butt end of the hockey stick.
Yeah, like if you hit somebody.
So you want to read a book with a butt ending?
No, I'm saying that it
You
should
nasty.
be. It should be called that because that's an actual hockey term.
Oh, okay.
That's what I'm saying. It would just be logical. That's all. That's
Whitney's
all I'm
like,
saying.
no, the butt was part of the plot. I swear.
Deb, when you were talking about tropes earlier, did you say age gap?
I didn't, because this age gap is so ridiculous. I don't really count it because he does look 25. Like,
okay, so I was writing down just questions about, some things I've already said. Like, why is it always like super young female protagonist? Why is it always a virgin, right? One of the other things that I wrote down is like, why is there always such a ginormous age gap? And I found on Tumblr a list of some of our Sarah J. Maas couples and the age gap between them. Are you ready for
Okay.
this? So first of all, Poppy and Castile's age gap is 200-ish years. Okay, that's not horrible.
it's not bad
compared to some of these other ones.
But I mean, the fact that, he has to, in this book, it makes sense because he has to have like grown, and he's supposed to be the king at some point.
Right.
And he's went through all this trauma, and he was held for 50 years. So again, part of the plot, it does make sense.
And all of, like you were just saying, all of these people look the same age. They're not the same age, but they look
and let's be honest, Castile doesn't act 300.
No, he
There's
acts
a book,
12.
and I don't even remember if it's these or any other ones, but I know there's a book I read, a fantasy book that literally talks about this, that it's like not, it's just a number. It's not.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Like in their world.
Don't think about it too hard.
Yeah.
Here's the difference, though. If this was a female Fae, there's no way she'd be fucking an 18-year-old man.
I know, right?
Because she'd be like, dude, you do not got what I need. I'll talk to you when you're 40. Yeah.
So here's some.
Get a few hundred years experience under your belt.
Here are some SJM couples from smallest age gap to biggest age gap. Okay.
Is it age gap or penis size?
She just did the thing with her hands. She's like a teeny tiny age gap or a really big age gap.
Don't be dirty. All right. So here's
sorry.
Dorian and Manon, or Manon, 96 years apart. Rowan and Aelin, 330.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
330-ish. There was a little plus mark. This is from Tumblr, by the way, so I did not double check these. Cassian and Nesta is 514, and Rhysand and Feyre is 515.
Yikes.
And I was like, ooh.
Well, again, no, the guys finally know what they're doing.
Here's the thing, though. When you say 515 years, like it's so out there that you're like, oh,
That
okay,
it like doesn't matter anymore.
But
yeah.
if you said he's 15 years older, like, she's 19 and he's what?
50?
50? Yeah. Ew.
I know, right? Well, and it's funny because one of the things that because I was trying to look up, why are these protagonists always so young? Why is this ginormous age gap a thing in fantasy? And I couldn't find anything that talked about like why that's so prevalent. One thing that it talked about just kind of in general is that the female protagonists, or not the female protagonist, but books have female protagonists just in general because so many of the authors are females and the readership is female, right? So like that makes sense. But I couldn't really find anything that talked about the reasoning behind stuff. But it was funny because it was talking about like ACOTAR and Blood and Ash. We have hundreds of years difference between these two characters, which we're all like you just said, Mindy, it's so big of a gap that it's just like, whatever, who cares? But then in Twilight, it's like, well, that's
Let's
a little
not
much.
be 19 and 16.
Right. Like that's a little much because it's like what, less than 100 years or just at 100 years or something like that. And it's like,
that,
ew, that's gross.
But also part of it is because Robert Pattinson sometimes seems 50 and sometimes seems 8. So I do wonder.
And most of the time seems constipated.
Right, yeah. So I do wonder in the next generation of women authors. So there was a lot of emphasis when we were all growing up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s of being in your 40s and 50s was old, right? Like, and we were even talking about this at like family dinner last night. Being a 40-year-old woman, you had led a pretty hard life at that point. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you aged more. You also were smoking a lot of cigarettes, drinking all the time, tanning in the tanning bed.
When you were either 18 or 19 or early 20s.
And so, like, you were fucking tired. And, like, I saw a magazine article that showed women in their 40s. They look like they're 70 years old. I'm not kidding. So, there was this emphasis on all of us growing up, like, your 20s is the place to be, and you're young and of childbearing age and all this shit. Well, now there is a lot of emphasis put on being a mature, worldly person, not having children until your 30s, not really hitting your prime until your 40s, being financially stable. So I wonder if we're going to see that change in books over the next 20 years. It would be nice.
That would be nice.
I mean, to your point, I saw something that said basically Jennifer Lopez is like 51, and that's the same age that Rue McClanahan started playing on Golden Girls.
Oh, wow.
And like they're like the same age, right?
And she was in like assisted living.
Yes, like she was retired and living in like an elderly home
not
community,
assisted living,
the patio home community, basically, like retired.
And now
Florida.
we're like, what do you mean you're 50? You can't move into a patio home,
right? You still have to work for 20
Look,
more
I'm going to be
years.
50 next year.
Well,
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I cannot tell you the number of times though that when I tell someone I'm 40, they're like, holy crap. And I'm like, it's not a bad thing.
No.
I'm like the best I've ever been. I'm really happy with the way that I look. And I mean, I do think all of us look way younger than our age, but it's because there is this expectation that 40s means you're old. And that has significantly shifted in society in the last 10 years, which is cool.
I actually got carded the other day, and it made me really excited.
I stopped getting carded during the pandemic. I think the pandemic aged me.
Well, so I'm at the store, and there's a sign that's like, if you're under the age of 30, just be ready to show your ID. And so then the lady asked to see my ID, and I was like, I said, does that mean that I look younger than 30? And she was like, you actually do. And I was like, oh my gosh, that just made my day. So I went out. Robbie was waiting in the parking lot. So I went out and I was like, I got carded. Told him, that means I look younger than 30. He goes, that's because you wore makeup today.
Oh, leave it to Robbie.
I know,
Your
right?
husband needs to learn when to actually put his foot in his mouth so he can shut up.
Sometimes he says things and I'm just like, why did
you think about that before?
But here's
100%.
Here's the
No,
thing
he did
about
not.
Robbie, though. He is so sweet and innocent. He doesn't mean it maliciously.
He really doesn't,
He just is
no.
talking out of his ass.
Yeah, he's like, it's because you put makeup on. You're like, you look much better.
You don't look like an old sea hag today.
Oh, man. But anyway, so yeah, that's the end of chapter 1. She's got this hard body behind her. Sorry. I just
Again, I'll be back in 3 or 4 minutes.
No, but I'm really excited. The next couple of chapters are her first interaction with Hawk Flynn. That feels like an Action Heroes.
I just was thinking Flynn Rider when you said that.
I did too.
The
I was
name's
like, wait,
Huck
is that
Flynn.
his name? Yes, it is.
And don't worry, Hawk Flynn is here. Anyway, is there anything else you guys wanted to make sure and talk about?
No, I
For
think
this first chapter?
we hit all the points.
Poppy's really going to go through a journey.
She's going through some shit, you guys.
Bless her heart.
Yeah,
she's
get
already
ready for a wild ride.
Well, what's crazy is we don't know the details of it at this point, but she's already been through a journey to get to chapter 1, right? And then it's just, she's just really been through
She
it.
just wanted to get laid.
She
Come
really
on,
did.
y'all.
She wanted to live.
And honestly, if Kieran, in spoiler for the next chapter, if Kieran hadn't knocked on the door, they would have done it.
Oh, 100%.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Because of course she knows who Hawk is as soon as she hears his voice. 'Cause
She would have
has
been all about it.
watching him practice and
has.
lusting at him across the field
Yep.
and all that shit.
Along with like everybody else
Yep.
in the castle.
Yeah.
You guys want to do Nerdiest Thing of the Week?
Of course, what was yours, Whit?
Mine was I had a child homesick for a couple of days, and I just read 3 books, like one right after the other. And
What'd you read?
I read Bend Her, which feels, like the kind of title you have to bend her. Like you have to say it a certain way. I read an arc for Elle Mitchell, A Little Unstable, which I really enjoyed. I really liked Bend Her too. And I read our book club book selection for this month, which is The Good Sister, which I also really liked, actually. They were 3 good, quick reads. And we were talking...
very different.
They really, they're very different from each other, but I enjoyed all of them. And we were talking about this the other day, and it was like, how am I reading these so fast? And then it's like, oh, because it's not...
A 900-page
yeah,
book.
it's not a JLA book or a Sarah J. Maas book. Like
You'll
it's
think-
a smaller book.
You'll think this is funny. So, The Good Sisters on Kindle Unlimited. It's by Sally Hepworth. And it is our book club pick this month. So I went on ahead and put it on my KU. But then I was not done with The Bonds That Tie yet. And I was out of room And I really do use my KU library as like a part of my TBR.
I do too.
Yeah.
And so I had to take her off for a minute. So I could put Unbroken Bonds
Oh, yeah.
on my list.
The bonds that tie
Oh yeah.
is just good. I support that choice.
If you follow us on Instagram, you know we like those books.
What about you, Mindy?
Well, I have two. For starters, the podcast related one. So our lovely producer, Brian, pointed out that we say the word interesting quite a bit. All
now
three of
they're
us.
going to notice it.
Some may say too many times.
And I find that very anxiety inducing because then I don't want to say it at all.
Well, that's interesting.
So because I knew I was going to try to say it quite often, and I'm sure I said it at least half the times that I didn't want to, I decided to go on the thesaurus and just print out some words that we could use instead of interesting. And I printed them out on a list and I put it in the middle of the table so we could use it as a reference.
I 1000% used it more than once
Yep.
in this episode. So
We all
thank
did.
you.
So that's my word nerd coming out there. But the other one is a hockey related. So it's no secret I'm a fan of the St. Louis Blues. I love watching them. They're the team I follow. I don't know if anybody's a sports fan, there's a team you follow. And there's this one hockey player that I just adore. I think he's a great guy. He's a great player. I've followed him since the beginning. And our team is not great this year. And I think they're going to like rebuild. And so they traded him. So he's not on the team anymore. And it's heartbreaking. Like I literally cried.
Oh, Mindy.
But
That's
here's
really
the
cute.
here's the other thing. He got traded to the team, the Maple Leafs, which is not even grammatically correct, which just really bothers me.
You wish it
Leafs
was
with an F?
Yes,
It should be the Maple Leaves.
It should be the Maple Leaves.
Why'd they do that?
I honestly don't know. To me, it just sounds weird, and I can't get used to seeing him in that uniform and the stuff's coming
Is it
up.
just a leaf? The uniform?
Yeah, it's one leaf.
Like Adam?
Yeah, it's totally naked. One leaf covering the crotch.
Yep.
That's very unsafe for hockey.
You could really butt someone with that.
Butt
someone with
Sorry.
that. Yeah.
So I mean, yes, that was the nerdy thing I did. I cried over a trade. I mean, these happen all the time in hockey. Like I knew it was coming. It wasn't even like a surprise. It just
But it sucks.
it hurts.
God, I
Yeah.
love you.
That's hilarious. Deb, what about you?
So I have two this week. You've heard me talk a little bit on the podcast about doing cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia that I've had since I was like 8 years old. So I graduated from sleep school this week,
Yay!
but then got diagnosed with PTSD. So I'm going to continue to see my doctor.
The same one.
and work through my PTSD because he said long term that's what's keeping me awake.
Yeah.
Right. So he helped me come up with skills to be able to get myself to go to sleep.
That's
and
good.
and to go to sleep if I wake up in the middle of the night. Right. But he said long term, to be a good sleeper, I got to get over some shit. Not get over it, work through it.
Well,
The
work
thing.
on
You
it,
gotta
yeah.
you gotta go to the root of the problem.
Right.
And get rid
Yeah.
of that.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah. So, that was funny, I guess. We do record these episodes a few weeks in advance. So hopefully you've seen this by the time this airs. But I have been fangirling over the Shadow and Bone trailer that was just released. It is so good. Have you seen it?
I did, yeah.
Because Mindy, I know you haven't watched that yet, but Whitney convinced me that Ben Barnes is kind of hot.
It's because he is.
He is in
Yeah.
that show. I don't like his hair. Like
Yeah.
combing your hair back doesn't do anything
It's a little.
for me.
It's a little too coiffed.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But he plays a really excellent villain.
Oh, you should.
When you say combing your hair back, all I'm picturing is like Dracula with the slick back. Like,
No, it's not that
bad,
bad.
but it's
You should watch him in The Punisher, the Netflix. I don't know if it's still on Netflix because Disney bought out
he
their.
was in that.
Yeah,
Oh,
he
dang.
was in season 2 of
Okay.
the Punisher.
Yeah, I don't know if that's still on there or not, but
I don't know if it is. You should watch it because it was good.
I will say what I was most excited about in the trailer, though, was seeing Nikolai.
Nikolai?
He
Yeah.
is one of my favorite characters. Spoiler about Shadow and Bone, if you want to plug your ears for a second. But what the fuck? I cannot believe she ended up with Mal. It was Nikolai all the way.
Yeah.
So mad about that. Still. Still.
Next week, we're going to be talking about chapters 2 and 3, all about Hawk. See you
Can't
then.
wait. Bye.